Well, folks, I am happy to welcome to Beat Diabetes, Brad Tiedemann. Brad is actually a type 1 diabetic, and he's learned about low-carb eating. A lot of people don't think type 1 and low-carb eating really have much to do with each other, but he found out differently. Brad, welcome to Beat Diabetes.
Thank you very much, Dennis. Very happy to be here, to share the story and the experiences I've had over the years.
Yeah, so you have a wife who is also a type 1 diabetic. That's got to be pretty rare. But you told me she's a little nervous about being on camera, so you're going to have to speak for the both of you.
Yep, I'm speaking for the both of us. She's camera shy, so when I brought up to her hopping on an interview, she's like, "Nope, I'm not going to do that." So, which didn't surprise me one bit. So, yeah, so I'm talking for both of us. We've both been on this journey together we've been married for 25 years, so for a very long time.
Yeah, so your wife is type 1 as well as you are. Were you both, you became type 1 in your childhood, as is normally the case, or was it later for you?
It was a little later, so both of us actually became type 1 diabetic when we were 18 years old. So both of us were 18 years old when we were diagnosed. For me, it was right after I graduated high school. I had just started college, and it hit me then. And my wife's actually 4 years older than I am, but she got it when she was 18 years old too. So she's had it for about 37 years, I think, and I'm going on a little over 33.
So tell us, Brad, about when you first began to experience that. When your pancreas goes out, it's not an easy transition. Was it a sudden thing, and what were your symptoms, and what were your emotions when you found out everything was falling apart?
So, yeah, that's a good point, saying you feel like everything's falling apart, because that's kind of how I felt. So, like I said, I just started college. I started the typical symptoms where I lost a lot of weight really fast, and I was urinating a lot. But I was 18 years old, so I didn't know what was going on. I just thought, I actually thought I was just stressed out or had something else going on. It never dawned on me that I had type 1 diabetes, because I didn't have that in the family, no history of it whatsoever. So I was actually nervous about going to the doctor and having them tell me something potentially worse. So I probably waited longer than I needed to go to the doctor. But the day that got me finally, I was mowing the yard, and I got about halfway done mowing the yard, and I was just so exhausted. I couldn't even push the lawnmower anymore. I was just dead tired. So I went to the doctor at that point, and I knew I was in trouble right when they put me on the scale. And I weighed 205 when I was a senior in high school. I'm 6'3", so fairly decent sized kid back then. But when I hopped on that scale, I weighed 135 pounds, and so I dropped all that weight in a short period of time. Basically, had starved to death, almost to death. So it was a good thing I got into the doctor's office, and my doctor actually initially thought that I may just be stressed out from starting college, and thought I might have just had ulcers going on or something like that. And then I told him about all the urinating and kind of felt dehydrated and all that stuff. And he's like, "Well, we need to do a blood check." And then that's when he checked my blood sugar, and I was actually over 600. So blood sugar is very, very high. And I think when they checked my A1c, it was 13.5% or something like that. So very high as well. Yeah, so it was similar. My wife had similar symptoms when she got it, just the urinating all the time. And
yeah, well, tell us about what the doctor had to say. Apart from that, he told you were type 1 and so forth, but what kind of advice did he give you? Did he give you any kind of nutritional advice, or how you were to handle this? I'm sure he prescribed insulin, told you about fast-acting and slow-acting insulin, but what other things did he tell you?
Yeah, so I was admitted to the hospital immediately. I spent 3 days in the hospital, and the doctor basically they started me on insulin right away, both slow-acting and fast-acting insulins, and then they hooked me up with a dietitian to do meal planning. Back then, 30 some years ago, it was more about eating category, like eating so many starches or breads and so many vegetables, and staying, basically they recommend you stay completely away from sugar altogether. But it's still, they still didn't talk about carbohydrates back then. It was just more of like I said, more of like the plate type of diet where you just serve yourself so many servings of bread or potatoes or that kind of thing, and so many servings of vegetables and so many servings of fruit. And so honestly, looking back from now till then, like, it wasn't the best advice dietary wise, for sure.
Yeah, but you were, as an 18-year-old young man, you hadn't learned to be cynical yet, probably, and so you just took their word for it. This is what Doc says I got to do.
Yep, absolutely. You listen to what the doc says to do, and actually, I went into after probably within a month, I went into a honeymoon stage. So for 6 months, I didn't have to take any insulin. I was like, part of me being an 18-year-old kid, you know, I was thinking maybe it was just something that happened and I'm over it type of thing. But then it came back with a vengeance again after about 6 months, and then there's no honeymoon stage after that. So yeah, and you know, look at, you know, some of the things that Dr. Bernstein talks about, and some of the other people, you know, and they're keeping people on, or younger kids on in the honeymoon stage for, you know, up to 3 years, just because they're putting them on a low carb diet. And it's like, man, you know, I wasn't on a low carb diet by any means back then. It was it wasn't even carb counting at that point in time. It was just, like I said, following a bread and vegetable and how many servings type of diet than anything.
Yeah, so that was 30 some years ago. You've had a lot of practice at being a type 1 diabetic.
Oh yeah, a lot of practice. There's been a lot of changes over the years. I mean, the insulin cost back then, I think it was like $9 a vial without even insurance getting involved. You know, it was just $9 for a bottle of or a vial of regular insulin. And now, you know, insulin's very expensive. Luckily, for my wife and I have really good insurance that covers a lot of the cost. But there's definitely been a business side of the insulin costs and pump costs, and there's just a lot of costs involved that makes you have to have insurance.
So you went a lot of years where I guess you followed the standard advice. You avoided sugar pretty much, and didn't worry about starches or carbs too much, and then tried to take enough insulin to make all that work. It caused some problems, though. It wasn't exactly a wonderful quality of life you were having.
No, when you're taking when you're, you know, especially when you're an 18, 19-year-old kid, I mean, you're taking shots 3 to 4 times a day. It's always inconvenient, and you never have a day off, right? It's like you're always dealing with that stuff. Back then, you know, it's just you're just checking your blood sugar 4 to 6 times a day, seeing where you're at. You know, where now it's like, I have a CGM, so I can see every 5 minutes where my blood sugar's at. But I've had some, you know, after 33 years, I've had frozen shoulder in both shoulders. So that's some of the long-term complications. My wife's had frozen shoulder. Luckily, that's kind of what we've been limited to. We haven't really had any hypoglycemic moments. Not anywhere we've been hospitalized. My wife was hospitalized while she was before she knew me. So this was like 30 years ago, where she had a hypoglycemic moment and ended up being hospitalized, but she hasn't had one since, luckily. And hope to keep it that way.
Yeah, so you haven't really done too bad even before you changed your diet. If you've avoided the severe hypoglycemic episodes, you've done well, because I know for a lot of type 1s, I mean, that's the thing they most greatly fear. And the worst part of it, really, some of them, I think, are more worried about the hypoglycemia than the shots bother them.
Yeah, and I agree, because especially if they've had one, like if I've had a moment where I was hospitalized, maybe it would affect me more, but I guess I've been lucky and haven't had a hypoglycemic moment where I've had to be hospitalized or couldn't control what I was doing. I've had a lot of low blood sugars over the years where sometimes I get temper rises a little bit because that's just how I respond sometimes. Just get a little irritated, but then I let the people around me know that if I start getting irritated or something, that there's a good chance that I'm having a low blood sugar. So I just say, just tell me like, hey, check your blood sugar. And so I do it now. Where now with the CGM, I can see it coming and I can react to it before it gets too low, or my pump will just quit providing me insulin so that I don't get too low, which makes a huge difference.
The problem with that is when you are in a bad mood and you're shouting and you look and your blood sugar is just fine, you don't have much of an excuse, do you?
Right. Nope, I don't then. Nope, I don't then. Yeah, but I know like the biggest thing for the wife and I recently here has been switching to a low carb diet. We never really got trained on the diet like what I've learned here over the last year with Dr. Bernstein's book and just the YouTube videos and videos like you've put out for your channel. That's what made us change to a low carb diet. Just what we've seen in on YouTube videos more than what the doctor or dietitians have told us. Honestly, the last time I met with a dietitian, she wanted me on 75 carbs per meal. So, that's 225 carbs per day. And that all that does is put you in a roller coaster ride of blood sugars. And it's very, very hard to manage. So, which gets very frustrating when you're trying to manage your blood sugars. And so there's a lot of frustrations over the years. But like I said, this last year being on low carb, it's just been so much better to control and so much better for our health and so much more energy that we both have. It's just been a huge game changer for us.
So what motivated you to make the change? You weren't doing terribly. I mean, as far as type 1 diabetics go, you sound like you were, pretty functional and it wasn't too bad, but at some point you saw something or read something or something happened where you said, you know what, I need to change my diet. Tell us what that involved.
So the big thing that back at the end of 2022, I got a new job. And at that point in time, I weighed about 235 pounds, which is more than I wanted to weigh. So I was like, I'm gonna work on trimming a little bit of weight off. And so a friend of mine was going through like the keto diet and low carb diet himself because he was trying to lose weight. He's like, you need to look into this. And so that's actually what got me into it as I started looking into the keto diet and the low carb diet. And then I'm like, well, how does low carb work with type 1 diabetes? And so I looked into that, and then I saw all these, channels where they were talking about how they use a low carb diet to manage their type 1 diabetes and how it's easier to control, more flatline blood sugars, less hypoglycemia. And I'm like, man, I need to get on that train. And so that's where I found the Dr. Bernstein's book. And then also there's a book out there called Doing Diabetes Differently by Chad Lewis. And I read his book, and which is a lot of the same messages, a shorter book that Dr. Bernstein wrote. And it's like, I need to do this. So my wife and I have always done meal planning. We've done meal planning for years. So all we really had to do is we found a lot of low carb recipes and just started laying out our weeks with these low carb recipes. And both of us did it, and both of us have gotten better control of our blood sugars. I usually ran around 7, a little above 7 or a little less 7 for A1Cs. My wife has always done a lot better than me, and she's always been in like the mid 6s. But after we started the low carb diet, I dropped to 6.2 first, and then 3 months later I dropped to 5.7 for my A1C. So which is the best I've ever had. And my wife dropped to 6, and I'm sure her next one's probably going to be even less than 6. I think she's just behind on the getting her A1C check compared to me. So it's just huge difference. But then on the other side of things, we both lost 90 pounds combined between the two of us. So we're both back at I actually weigh less than what I did when I was a senior in high school, and my wife weighs what she did when she was in high school. So both of us are in really good shape. Now I give a little bit of that to the exercise routine that we have too. We do make sure that we We do work out every other day, which is something we also started a year ago when we started the low carb. We also just started exercising. So a lot of it is just walking. When the weather's nice, we go on 4-mile walks every other day. Now that the weather's colder, we have a treadmill and an elliptical machine, and we just make sure we hit that every other day for a little bit, just to keep our health, our exercise routine up, and it helps with our blood sugars as well. So.
Yeah. Now, one thing that makes me nervous, and in fact, it makes quite a few doctors nervous, is that when someone who's taking insulin, like a type 1, or even a type 2 who's taken some high-powered diabetic meds, and they cut their carbs significantly, their blood sugar can drop too low. When you first changed your diets, did you experience that, or did you keep such an eye on your blood sugar that you could adjust your insulin? And did you talk to your doctor about it?
Yeah, so I would say I didn't talk to my doctor before I started it. I talked to her my next appointment, told her this is what I was doing, and because she wanted to know, that's when I dropped to 6.2 A1c, and I told her what I'd been doing in the low carb. But I managed the lowering of the insulin kind of on my own, because having a CGM, like I would not do it without a CGM, because the CGM, like I said, gives you every 5-minute reading on what your blood sugar is, so you can understand where you're at. But going with low carb, I did change my basal, which is the lower dosage of insulin you get throughout the whole day. I did change that because of the low carb, and then obviously when you're not consuming a lot of carbs, you're not giving yourself a bolus, or as much of a bolus as what I had in the past. So it's a lot of just managing, checking the numbers, watching the CGM. But I will say both of us probably use half the insulin that we were a year ago, just because that's how much insulin we had to reduce.
How many units of insulin per day have you dropped from the old days?
Oh, it's probably 30 units a day at least. Because because right now I probably average about 35 units a day, and I was probably averaging around that 70 units per day.
So you just kept watching that CGM and adjusting accordingly.
Correct. Yep.
Okay. Well, obviously it's worked for you. There are a lot of doctors that will tell diabetics, don't even try to get below 7. It's too dangerous. But you haven't found it dangerous, have you?
No, actually, I don't know if they're just saying that because they're protecting themselves. Because I'm like I said, I'm at 5.7, and actually, when you're not on that roller coaster of blood sugars, I actually feel better about where I'm at right now than what I was when I was at the 7.1 to 6.9, bouncing back and forth there, because I actually have less hypoglycemic blood sugars, right, or instances right now, because I'm not coming down hard from a high blood sugar. So before, like post meal, they 2 hours later they'd want you to be at 160, so you'd go up to 250, and then you'd come down to 160 within 2 hours. Well, now a lot of times I don't even ever hit 160. It's more of like I said, it's more of like a kiddie ride roller coaster than it is a extreme roller coaster. And so it's a lot easier to manage. And there's a lot of people out there that are a lot more stricter. And, Dr. Bernstein, they have a goal like running at an 83 average, I believe the number is, or 86, somewhere in the 80s. For an average. So it's like they're hitting it really hard, and they're having A1Cs in the 4 range. They're having normal A1Cs for type 1 diabetics, which is amazing. So
let me give you a scenario and tell me what your response would be. Back when you were having those 7 A1Cs and you're just doing things the normal way, suppose you had said to yourself, well, I want a better A1C. I want lower numbers. but I'm not going to do it by diet. I'm just going to inject more insulin and still more insulin until I get my numbers down. Do you think that would have been a wise choice to make instead of the way you did it?
I think that'd be a horrible choice. To be honest with you, I think solving things with more insulin is the wrong way to go. I think that's what gets you. That's what gets people. The more insulin you're taking, the more chance you have of having a hypoglycemic moment. You're loading yourself up with insulin. You need to find ways to not have to take more insulin. It's the more insulin you're taking, I think the longer term, the worse off you're going to be. That's my opinion. So,
yeah. Well, I agree. And Dr. Bernstein makes the point that the one thing so many diabetic doctors are totally terrified of is that their patients will drop dead of a hypoglycemic episode. And so therefore, they make sure they don't take too much insulin and they eat plenty of carbs to keep from going low. But your way is totally different, which is Dr. Bernstein's way. And sounds like, you're doing almost everything right. I have to take my hat off to you for that. Let's talk about your wife. Usually when a couple makes a change, it's not at the exact same time. Usually one of them gets the idea first and then the other follows along. I am assuming that you were the first to enter the low-carb diet and then your wife followed. And if that's so, was she a hard sell? Did it take a lot, or did she just kind of see what was happening with you?
No, she was she was not a hard sell. She saw what I was doing more from the. I started exercising a little bit before she did, and she got to. I think a lot of it was she got to a weight she wasn't too happy with, and so one night she's just like, "That's it, I'm doing it." So we actually started the exercise part of it before we started the low carb part of it. So we started exercising, and then I found the low carb, and then when I brought the low carb stuff, she saw the recipes and all the different things that you could eat on the low carb diet, and then she saw the success that my friend was having he was losing weight on the low carb diet, and she's really good with recipe books and planning meals out and stuff like that. So she put she spent hours putting low carb recipe book together, and now we just plan our week out with a low carb diet, and We've always, like I said, we've always done meal planning. We've done meal planning for well over 20 years. So now it's just meal planning with low carb recipes, and that's worked out great for obviously both of us.
Yeah, absolutely. And here you are, a type 1 diabetic with an A1c in the 5, something a lot of people didn't think was even possible. When we talk about low carb, you and I both know what that looks like, but there may be some watching that don't even have a clue what that means. Tell us some of the things the specifics of how you changed your diet and went from pretty much a high carb to a low carb.
Yeah, the biggest change we made is just getting rid of anything that was white. So rice, bread, pizza crusts, all that kind of stuff. Now we eat cauliflower, that's white, but that's still something we switched from regular rice to cauliflowered rice, which is a big deal. But a lot of it was, like I said, is just taking out the things that are really high carb and switching with other things. So we make a lot of chaffles, which is kind of like a waffle substitute, but it's basically made with eggs and almond flour. And cheese, and so that a lot of it was just, again, removing flour, removing sugar, and just there's so many recipes out there that are just as good as anything that has a lot of carbs in it, and just testing it. So we've had a few recipes where we didn't like it, where it didn't turn out so well, but we just crossed that one off the list, and we move on to other things. So we eat a lot of chicken, a lot of meat products, and a lot of cheese. And we actually quit drinking milk too. We very rarely have milk. We drink almond milk, and we actually use a lot of heavy cream in recipes. And we still eat desserts almost every day. They're just desserts with heavy cream or zero ready whip and things my wife makes up that are very low carb, but they still taste really, really good. So so the change has not been too bad. It's just a matter of properly meal planning.
Yeah, well, I get the feeling that you and your wife don't sit around all day singing the blues and feeling sorry for yourself.
No, we don't, but that doesn't mean it's not hard, right? It doesn't mean it hasn't been a challenge. You still, over the years, you still have the diabetic depression where you get frustrated. It happens, it's going to happen over 33 years because it's a challenge. But I tell you, after switching to a low carb, just as easy as it's made our lives in the last year, and like I said, with the weight loss and the feeling better, it's like we're two new people.